It's the 29th of September 2021. Welcome, everybody. I'm Dana Durnford. I'll be your host tonight, also known as the nuclear proctologist.org. You can call in at 709-589-4406. It's 709-589-4406. I hope everybody's doing okay. It always takes us a minute or three to get up to full bashing speed. Let's just jump into it anyway. As we do every show, it's feet first into the fire, right? And so we're going to cover a news cycle tonight. But I want to just got one little thing I got to do here. Just one little thing to do. There we go. We're good to go. New push on to expand nuclear radiation compensation in the United States. Now, they want to have compensation for everybody in 7 different states. But they're going to take food from multiple nuclear meltdowns and ship it to those same states. Multiple nuclear meltdowns in Japan and ship it into North America. It should terrify everybody. Lawmakers are renewing a push to expand a U.S. compensation. My apologies here. I'm having a few issues on my side. We'll get there. Okay, here we go. For people who were exposed to radioactive fallout, not just from uranium mining, but nuclear testing. So nuclear testing, there was massive amount of radioactive fallout. Hi, everybody. Advocates have been trying for years to bring awareness to the lingering effects of the radioactive fallout from nuclear, what they call testing. The nuclear testing is a nuclear war. It doesn't matter if you fired the weapon in anger or not. The radioactive fallout is the same thing, as you can see. The U.S. military detonated the first atomic bomb was Trinity site. And on Navajo Nations, where more than 30 million tons of uranium ore were extracted over decades to support the genocide machine. So under legislation introduced Wednesday by multiple senators, other sites across American West would be added to a list of places affected by the fallout and radiation exposures. And eligibility also would be expanded to include certain workers in the industry after 1971, because they actually put a limit on when you can be injured. But radiation lasts for millions of years. If you go to the nuclear test bomb craters, you'll get irradiated, despite the fact it was decades ago. Legislation would increase the amount of compensation someone can receive to $150,000, and also provide coverage for additional forms of cancer, but cancer is just one of 1,800 illnesses. And a multi-billion-dollar defense spending package approved last year included an apology to New Mexico, Nevada, Utah, and other states affected by radioactive fallout from nuclear testing. But no action was taken on legislation that sought to change and broaden the compensation package or programs. Advocates, including those who testified before Congress earlier this year, said it's time to do so, especially because the existing provisions are set to expire next July. and that the legislation would extend the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, or RECA, another 19 years, and appropriately so. It should be forever, see? Because generations down the road can get sick from that event. We put forth language. Here goes the throat again. Is it just me, or am I red in the face here tonight? There you go. Not so red in the face anymore. Too bad we can't do that in real life, eh? So make or break time for the downwinders. Now, the wind blows every direction. There's no such thing as the actual... The downwinder was originally about downriver. So, because all nuclear plants are built on rivers. And the waste runs downriver, right? So they co-opted that and called it downwinders. But as you know, the wind blows every direction. And the nuclear testing covered the entire America and Canada and Ireland and Scotland in radioactive fallout, just to name a few. Some members of Congress might argue that there's not enough money to bankroll the proposal. Not enough money to bankroll the proposal. But they got trillions of dollars for the military-industrial complex. Just get rid of nuclear and give the victims that money. Some members of Congress might argue that there's not enough money. We won't settle for that answer any longer. Imagine the insult added to our injury of such a statement. There's always money when there's political wills. And there is a social, environmental, and restorative justice issue that we as a nation can no longer look away from, which is correct. It's 100%. And the Navajo Nation was 30,000 abandoned uranium mines. Sorry, 15,000. Is that I get lost sometimes? Democratic U.S. representatives from New Mexico are helping to lead the push in the House. And the House Republicans who co-sponsor the bills. And so we can see a lot of Congress people understand the significance of it. While there can never be a price placed on one's health or the life of a loved one, Congress has an opportunity to do the right by all of those who sacrifice in service of our national security by strengthening RECA, he said in a statement. So we got a poll going tonight. Let's bring that up quickly. Now, I've been doing the polls wrong. I'm supposed to end the poll before the show, and then it shows up in the replay. We haven't been doing that. And so the poll tonight, should the nuclear lobbyists now spend life in jail for crimes against humanity, or should they get the death penalty? So people says they should definitely minimum get life in jail. And we have 11 votes. So obviously the spammers haven't showed up here yet to the pro-nuclear. When they do, you'll see the no vote go crazy, like we did last night, right? Now, food safety news. Food safety news, that's the name of the site. Advocates poisoning everybody. This is what the industry does. It creates these sites, food safety news. And then it says, well, nuclear can't hurt you. They'll have 1,000 different sites where they'll do that to you. And Google will push all of them. That's what's been going on for several decades straight. What an insidious, cowardly thing to do, by the way. Imagine what kind of idiot and monster you actually are to create a site like that in order to promote nuclear. U.S. and EU eases Fukushima import rules. And it's after determining a very low risk to American consumers from radioactive contaminated food imported from a nuclear wasteland. It's not just Fukushima Prefecture. All of those prefectures the food is banned from until last week. 55 countries. It wasn't just one prefecture, it was 14. All of the northern prefectures. And it should be 3/4 of the rest of the prefectures. And so the people... Hang on here. At Food Safety News, that's a public relation firm site promoting nuclear. Wrap your mind around that. Prime Minister unelected appointed Suga thanks to U.S. for lifting a ban on radioactive food. How can anybody promote something like that? How evil or how disconnected from reality have you got to be to promote something like that? Really? How does that work? He thanked the president for lifting the ban on imports of radioactive food from a nuclear wasteland. And that came to you from what's supposed to be a food safety, and what they done was promoted radioactive food. The ultimate betrayal, really. Imagine you started up that site. How do you look anybody in the eye, let alone yourself? And think about what's going on at the same time. There's a $23 trillion clean energy market. They're promoting nuclear in Europe, which is EU just lifted the ban, and the US, right? So there's all of a sudden, they're trying to get a chunk of that. This is all about a group of people trying to make money. And they do it by murdering everybody, just randomly murdering everybody. Think about what kind of disconnect they have. They should obviously be getting the death penalty for what they're doing, or at least go to jail for 1,000 years. The climate crisis is created by radiation fallout because it's forever. So let me give you a little depiction, because if not, people say, well, I don't understand what he's talking about. Well, here's the radiation models from Fukushima covering just the northern hemisphere. It doesn't stop there. It covers the whole planet. It's an invisible cloud. Like, think of a snowstorm covering the entire northern hemisphere, for instance, at the one time. Then you can appreciate it, yeah? But you can't see it or smell it or taste it or hear it or touch it or feel it. Does that mean it doesn't exist? Because it does. It's an invisible cloud of energy, pulsing energy at the speed of light every second. That's forever. And so it's going to heat up the planet. It's been going on for 75 years, since Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But then you have all the nuclear wars that people call nuclear testing for some reason. So it works this way. The Castle Bravo test in the Bikini Atolls, just that single bomb was equal to 1,000 Hiroshimas. 1,000 Hiroshimas. It's the equivalent of 2 countries firing 500 nuclear weapons each, the size of the one that destroyed Hiroshima, at each other. That's a nuclear war, right? If you fired, instead of 1 nuclear bomb at Japan, imagine firing 500 of those nuclear bombs at Japan. But then imagine Japan firing 500 back at you. Is that not a nuclear war? Because the radioactive fallout is the same with the Bravo as it would be for 1,000 nuclear weapons. That's pulsing energy for millions of years floating around. All the other nuclear meltdowns that they hid away from you. There's MAYAC. There's all kinds of releases from all the fuel pools worldwide that rival that. The fuel pools will rival that every day. Invisible snowstorms. pulsing energy every second. That's global warming. It kills all the bacteria in the forest don't break down. And so when you have fires in the forest, not only do the forest burn because the forest didn't break down like they normally would, because there's no bacteria anymore, but you liberated all the radiation in the forest that was sequestered for decades back into the environment, where it might have floated around for 1 million years looking for other victims. But it's still going to be pulsing energy, whether it's sequestered in the forest or the ground or the rivers or the oceans or anywhere. It's still pulsing energy every second. You've been hoodwinked for 75 years. It's time to snap out of it. It's never too late to do the right thing. They're calling low carbon technology, of course, they're promoting nuclear, part of a $23 trillion market by the end of the decade. So they're promoting nuclear, calling it carbon free, when it's absurd to suggest that nuclear has any of those attributes. Nuclear is the most carbon intensive thing on the entire planet. Not only that, you need 2 oil, gas, or coal plants just to run a nuclear power plant. It can't run on its own power. Damn, man. And not everybody's comfortable with nuclear energy. She will say, the countries that do want it, we cannot afford to ignore clean, safe, reliable sources of energy. She's the Energy Secretary of the United States. It's not clean, it's not safe, and it's not reliable. You despicable piece of shit. Oh, yes, Maralinga. The first nuclear bomb, they call it testing, the first nuclear war that they started in Australia, because the radioactive fallout is the same whether you drop the bomb in war or not, was September 27th, a couple of days ago. And it was Maralinga. They actually waited for the winds to blow towards Adelaide. I can't remember the distance, 2,400 kilometers or something. And the numbers in Adelaide after was 96,000 counts per minute on the Geiger counters of beta. So not counting alpha and gamma and neutrons, just beta. The British went to Australia because they didn't want to radiate their own country, waited for the winds to blow across Australia, and then done their nuclear detonations. They also took plutonium that's gone through a chain, which is, you can't get it without a chain reaction, and fission uranium, 235, and wrapped it in conventional dirty bomb explosives and done several hundred of them in Australia, dispersing the plutonium and uranium deep in the country itself. That's terrorism, right? That's the first dirty bombs, true dirty bombs, where they took plutonium, wrapped it in dynamite, and blew it up. Like, what point is considered too much? That is, what is the definition of a crime? Would be a dirty bomb, which is what they done several hundred times, by the way, to Australia. The atomic age reached Maralinga, Australia, with a blinding flash on September 27th, 1956. Still radioactive today. I would normally direct you to my presentations about that, but the nuclear industry has taken down my main site on YouTube several weeks back, over a month back, with 24,000 subscribers and 1,600 videos. So I can't direct you to those videos anymore. A 15 kiloton atomic device, which is the same size as Hiroshima, by the way, had as much explosive strength as the weapons that fell on Hiroshima. As not the strength, the radioactive fallout is more appropriate. And the atomic test in Maralinga was carried out by the British government as part of Operation Buffalo, and ran by the United Kingdom's Atomic Weapons Research Establishment. So they went to their penal colony known as Australia, waited for the winds to blow across Australia towards major population and farm fields and aquifers, and detonated the nuclear weapons when the wind was perfect to poison the entire country. So they're part of the poll. They're what we call lobbyists, nuclear lobbyists. Should they get the death penalty? So the poll is up to 14 votes. 71% says they should at least spend their life in jail for crimes against humanity. I personally think they should get the death penalty. I personally think all of them should get the death penalty. Hi everybody. Hope everybody's doing good. And look, they got a zombie police officer in that picture. You can't go into the nuclear wasteland. They got police there keeping you out of a nuclear wasteland, but they can't keep the wind from blowing it into your communities. And in the moments after detonation, their own aircraft pilots were victimized and told to fly through the radioactive clouds with no protective equipment to shield them from the radiation whatsoever. For the next 7 years, major and minor nuclear tests, the minors being the dirty bombs where they took conventional explosives. The very definition of a dirty bomb is when you take radiological isotopes themselves, wrap it in dynamite and detonate them, and you're still spreading the radiation, contaminating the environment. That's a dirty bomb, what they were doing. Same as the A-10 Warthog military aircraft, for instance. All it shoots is DOLRAM, depleted uranium low-level radioactive materials that have already gone through a chain reaction. That if I took the bullets from an A-10 Warthog plane, they shoot 1.5 tons a minute, by the way. If I took that, wrapped it in conventional explosives, and blew it up, that's a dirty bomb. But it's not a dirty bomb if the military shoots it into brown people's countries, apparently. But it actually is. Imagine how evil you got to be to participate in that. And the people who fly the planes are usually coming from inbreeds of the industry itself. The minor test led to contamination of the area with plutonium-239 with a half-life of 24,000 years. Half-life. There's 10 half-lives. 10. Prior to the test, little effort was put into finding and notifying the victims who lived on the land. The natives, in addition to the obvious immediate dangers of nuclear fallout, the indigenous community would endure long-term hazards of poisoned land and water for more than 30 years. And a few further 2 detonations carried at Edmund Field. And Britain moved the testing site to Maralinga after previous locations were deemed too remote for nuclear weapons tests. Too remote. Because the radiation wasn't destroying the farms and the aquifers and the communities as good as they would like. So they moved closer to the communities so they can actually destroy them. It's absurd. The British government began the process of cleaning the 3,200 square kilometers of contaminated land. Every time the wind blows, every time it rains there, it distributes radiation throughout the whole country. The definition of evil is nuclear. Nuclear is evil. In 1984, they found that the land was still highly radioactive, but they were letting the victims go back. And what they only really done was plowed the plutonium soil into the ground. They didn't clean it up. They just plowed it into the ground like they done at Fukushima. I guess that's where Japan got their idea of plowing the farmer's field deeper underground and growing food there. Imagine how sick and demented you got to be to do something like that. Imagine how twisted. 9 years later, 1993, following the Royal Commission, that's one of the most disgusting connotations imaginable. The British government agreed to pay a portion, a tiny, tiny fraction of a percent of the estimated $101 million cleanup cost. You can't clean up any nuclear for $100 million, and you can't clean up 32,000 square miles. So 3,200 square miles. Let's do the math on that for everybody. So 3,200 square miles divided by $101 million equals $3 per square mile. $3 per square mile. That can't be right. Oh, I see. I didn't get that right at all, did I? Let me do that again. Dana. What did I do wrong? 3,200 divided, I got that right, by, I got it backwards. I'm an idiot. I apologize. So $101 million. I'll get it right this time. I'm brain dead today. Divided by 3,200. It's 31,000 a square mile. What are you going to do for 31,000 a square mile? They're going to steal that. The British government agreed to pay a portion of that money. And in 94, 38 years after the initial blast, the Australian government paid $13.5 million to the indigenous people of Maralinga as compensation. And they stole that, of course. By the way, Australia wants nuclear power. They just recently had a massive earthquake. They didn't know about the fault line, they claim. They didn't know about the fault line. Why Australia should shut down the Lucas Heights nuclear reactor. Last week's fire on a nuclear waste ship off Scotland, shows why Australia Lucas Heights nuclear reactor should be shut down. Indeed. On the 7th of October, well, what year is this story then? Oh, this was 2014. Right, I wanted to make an example. After ship caught fire and drifted into Moray Firth, the ship was 7 miles from an oil platform, and they evacuated all the employees from the platform because of the cargo ship was carrying radioactive waste being returned to Belgium. And that the nuclear waste was sent to Donerae, which they figured is going to be 300 years before they cleaned that up. A reprocessing plant in 1990, and they made mixed oxide fuel out of it. The ultimate evil. That's actually... The reason they make mixed oxide fuel is where you reclaim uranium, plutonium, hot particles from used fuel, and you put it back in a reactor, and what they call burning it. And they release it into the environment because you can't destroy it. That way they don't have to store it for 1 million years. See? The industry is unequivocally 100% out of control, and they have gone genocide and omnicide on this planet. Every facet of nuclear, the only conclusion you can draw is they're trying to exterminate all species, not just humans, but all species, and permanently. It's a death cult. Quite worrying that a ship carrying nuclear waste is easily tracked by a mobile phone app. Well, the nuclear industry are terrorists. That's what they do for a living. They're terrorists. British Nuclear Decommissioning Authority that has never decommissioned a single reactor in United Kingdom or a single nuclear submarine in United Kingdom, but has the incredible, unbelievable courage to call themselves a decommissioning authority, but they have never decommissioned a single facility in their entire legacy. And Sellafield melted down a mixed oxide facility in the United Kingdom. It used to be called Windscale. It had a nuclear meltdown. So they didn't go to other nuclear power plants looking for volunteers. They didn't go to universities looking for volunteers. They didn't go to nuclear corporations looking for volunteers when Windscale melted down. They went to the theaters and stole the people from the back rows of the theaters in the 50s. And if you look at the 50s, the rich people sat up front. The poor people sat in the back. It's still melting down with around 8 million liters a day hemorrhaging of mixed oxide, what they call wastewater, hemorrhaging into the ocean since 1955. The British Nuclear Decommissioning Authorities shouldn't be allowed to say anything. They shouldn't be quoted for anything. They should be in jail for the rest of their lives for the crimes they committed against all the species on this planet, let alone the United Kingdom and Australia. Highly radioactive waste from Lucas Heights nuclear reactors have been sent to France, Argentina, and Donerays. So here's Australia, takes their nuclear waste, sends it to a country to make it into mixed oxide fuel, but they still have to take what's left over back to their country. But in order to make that, you have incredible releases into the environment. We know that in France's La Hague and United Kingdom's Sellafield used to be named Windscale, but they changed the name to Sellafield to hide the fact that they kidnapped people from theaters during a nuclear meltdown. The closing of Doneray will take at least 300 years, by the way, involving demolition of facilities like experimental reactors. Their fast reactor melted down, right? The prototype fast reactor. They also built huge vaults. And the cost of transporting the high-level waste in 90 train shipments under armed escorts. Like somebody's actually going to steal it. You can't steal nuclear waste because it kills you. But that's how they suck money, right? That's how they destroy your country and your economy. Is they just gobble up all your resources and all your money. Information on the amount of radioactive trash for return. Trash! Radioactive trash! Scumbags. For return to Australia is not publicly available. Of course it's not. For Belgium, which has 2 nuclear reactors, over 150 tons of nuclear waste being returned over a 4-year period. So 1 pound of it. If everybody on the planet walks past the 1 pound of it, but if you put that out in the open, it'll catch fire, right? But let's say it doesn't catch fire. And you walk past it, you drop dead. Everybody on the planet can drop dead from a single pound walking past 1 pound of it. You can take that pound, go to another planet, and you can kill everybody on that planet with that same 1 pound. You can take that pound, bring it to another planet 1,000 years from now and kill everybody on that planet. It's still splitting the atom on top of that. That's vented into the environment. Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organization And health. How can you put the word health in with nuclear? Had one breach of its license and 56 radiological events or near misses. Every facet of it leaves you horrified of nuclear. Everywhere you look at nuclear, the present government, which is the pro-nuclear community that has captured the regulators, captured key positions in governments, captured the medias, captured your universities in increments over decades, and installed their little inbreeds. The present government media focused on terrorism has already produced danger reports about Lucas Height. In late September 2014, 500 police officers surrounded the Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organisation, ANSO Health, when 2 cars were seen at the entrance of the plant. So 2 cars that go up to the nuclear power plant surrounded by farms gets a response of 500 armed people, security. Try wrapping your mind around it. So nuclear, right, is no problem, no issues. 2 cars shows up, we need 500 people there at a research reactor. All I want to do after doing this for years and years and years, all I can think about is I have a hard time reconciling why everybody on the planet don't get a baseball bat and go deal with this. Because they need baseball bat worse than anybody on the planet, the nuclear industry and everybody in it. Everybody in the nuclear industry should be dealt with one way or another. UK faces an energy crisis. Could nuclear play a vital role? Of course it can't. How can nuclear play a role? I'll explain myself here. And bear with me. Like, there's no media out there. It'd be easy for the media to wreck the nuclear industry in just a couple of days. It'd be mindless, simple. Unbelievably simple. But they were captured by the industry in increments now over decades. So we're now officially the media. Okay, I'll show you the comparison. Here we go. Wind and solar, the global increase in 2020 in renewables was 261 gigawatts. That's the same as 300 nuclear power plants in 1 year. There are actually only 440 nuclear power plants, but only 416 operating worldwide. But we created the equivalent of 300 nuclear power plants worth of energy in just renewables last year in a 12-month period. But they talk about over here retiring 100 gigawatts over 20 years threatens the nuclear, but we almost tripled that in renewables in 1 year. So how can nuclear compete with something like that? How does that actually work? On the morning of Friday, October 11th, 1957, not 55, a fire had broken out at Windscale, which we talked about earlier, in the United Kingdom, now called Sellafield to hide crimes. Positions had been held all night, but fire is still fierce. It's not a fire, it's a nuclear meltdown. Couldn't come at a worse moment for the British scum degenerate nuclear establishment. Windscale 2 Pile, which is a nuclear reactor, the country's first operational reactors, were churning out fissile material for a secretive atomic weapons program, and scientists were scheduled to detonate the United Kingdom first hydrogen bomb within weeks. Now, instead of a triumph, a possible, this wasn't possible, this was an actual meltdown, scumbag. The blaze had taken hold in the core of reactor 1, a graphite structure like Chernobyl, with no containment, by the way. Honeycombed with thousands of channels full of slugs, a highly radiated uranium fuel, and various toxic byproducts of nuclear fission. Americium, plutonium, strontium, curium. Temperature raged above 400 degrees Celsius. The risk was that the fuel cans could ignite and burst, spewing radioactive content across Colombia's countryside. It covered the entire northern hemisphere. This is what I mean. Financial Times, see? Pro-nuclear industry. The one blind spot was that the worst had not happened. Emissions had not been very serious and hoped to continue to hold. In fact, the emissions were brutal. They still are today. There's still 8 million litres a day coming out of Sellafield. The assistant works manager, Tom, had tried pumping in carbon dioxide without effect. And Plowden couldn't know it, but by the time he reached these words, the dangers had passed. The fire was out, when it actually wasn't. It's still melting down today, for God's sakes. Emissions as had leaked from the reactor were almost all captured by filters. First off, it doesn't actually, you can't capture the filter. The filter now is so radioactive, all the air going through it is radioactive. If you could capture it, but you can't. So they're claiming that the fire was out right away, that there was no emissions, it was all captured by a filter. Like, how can the species have a future on this planet with these scumbags on it, I wonder? The Windscale fire is generally regarded as Britain's biggest nuclear accident, but despite its fearful reputation, it had no observable health consequences. What? Really? Nothing but lie after lie after lie after lie after lie. It sounds like it's written by Geraldine Thomas or Robert Gale. Assessments of prospective food chain doses from radioactive discharges from Sellafield is a study. Windscale radiation spread further than omitted. Yeah, it covered the whole bloody planet. Mortality in Cumberland during 1958 and 78, with references to cancer in young people around Windscale. The United Kingdom universities actually produced a study saying the cancer clusters was caused by the flu, not by the nuclear industry. Scumbags. You don't know what a scumbag is till you look at the nuclear industry. Cancer in Cumbria had a Windscale connection. Children cancer around nuclear fuel reprocessing plant at Sellafield. Today, those red stained lantern top stacks no longer loom over the countryside. And the chimney on Reactor 2 came down 2 decades ago, while its fire-contaminated neighbor, fire-contaminated. You don't get contamination from fire, you get it from radiation. You despicable coward. You disgusting cowards who wrote this. You revolting, spineless creatures that wrote that. You vicious, hateful, despicable monsters that wrote this. While his fire-contaminated neighbor is still being dismantled today. 70 years later. 74 years later. Windscale is now known as Sellafield, because they changed the name. I put together, there was a documentary that talks about it. I put together, here it is right now. This is Windscale.
The police from the factory had turned up looking for volunteers, and they'd brought a bus, and they decided the best way to get the volunteers was to go to the cinema and and volunteer the back 2 rows at the show to go into the factory to, as it turned out, to help push the fuel rods out of the reactor.
So they jacked people from the back rows of the theater and took them to the nuclear meltdown. They didn't get nuclear academics or nuclear scientists or nuclear alumni or nuclear corporations or nuclear students. The world's first civil nuclear power station, Calder Hall, opened by the Queen in 1956. One of the world's biggest nuclear sites after Hanford. Sellafield still handles all the material produced by Britain's 7 nuclear power plants. The whole world should be ashamed because Sellafield is surrounded by farms. Right up to the gate. And as far as you can see, surrounded by farms. Many think that nuclear power is vital if the country is to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. A goal to which the government is legally committed from the Paris Accord, which was France. Look up the article, The French Connection, from the 1970s. It's still out there. What you see is that every prime minister in Canada in recent history worked for a French company, the same company. And so did most of the premiers of the bigger provinces worked for the same French company. Many think nuclear power is vital. No, not many. What do you mean many think? Where's evidence shows nuclear power is vital? Where's the evidence? Many think. It's an opinion, a conjecture, right? Yet new reactors are expensive. Hinkley Point C will cost north of $22 billion and saddle consumers with elevated energy bills for decades to come. Decades! It'll take 100 years to decommission it, and all the communities will be nothing but disease. It's a disease factory. And Hinkley Point C, they got every piece of precious metal on the entire planet stolen for these disgusting parasites to be irradiated and useless. And the rest of it is put in military satellites and blasted up into space. The precious resources on the planet have been destroyed on purpose by these industries so that humanity can have no future. What else makes any sense, really, see? The scumbag industry hopes the cost will fall as more are built. An uncertain back-end cost threatens to upend the technology already stretched economics, while waste disposal poses even more difficult problems. Comparatively little of Sellafield and few of Britain's other first-generation nuclear plants have yet been wholly dismantled. Comparatively little has been dismantled 74 years later. And the full bill for dealing with these relics and hence nuclear life cycle costs cannot yet be known 75 years later. They're lunatics. The whole industry, the current generation of the nuclear industry, are the inbreeds of previous generations. They're what I call the entitled lot. Their parents were scumbags, and their parents were scumbags, and their great-grandparents were scumbags, and their great-great-grandparents were nuclear scumbags. And they're coasting on all of the scumbags' previous genocides and ecocides and omnicides. Then there is the worry about where to put all the waste. There is no where, they're not even trying. For which there is no final destination, because they want the waste to sit in the open. That's on purpose. because it's still splitting the atom. Those atoms are released into the environment as a nuclear war would release radiation into the environment. You have 440 nuclear pools worldwide hemorrhaging radiation 24 hours a day. So they put the fuel rods in the pools, you take it out of the reactors, so the reactors are powering 1 million homes. Now once you take it out of the reactor, it's still producing power for 1 million or 2 million homes forever. They put that in a pool of water that boils off every day. That water is saturated with those atoms that would normally boil water. Those atoms now are released into the environment all day. So 440 pools, with each of them with decades of reactor cores. Say thousands of reactor cores. Thousands of reactor cores that can each power 1 million plus homes, releasing all that energy forever, all day, into the environment, floating around invisible snowstorms of radiation, pulsing energy every second. It's global warming on steroids. And they're doing it on purpose. It's 100% on purpose. The extinction of all the species is 100% on purpose by this industry, this death cult. It's not an industry, it's a death cult. It's a disease machine. When a nuclear plant closes, there are 3 types of waste material. The safest is the low level, which is not safe, by the way, which include items like old protective clothing. Well, the reason that's radiation is because it got contaminated. It's not low level, it's contaminated. And it accounts for 90% of all the waste by volume. So imagine how much transgenic waste that they actually create. There's an absurd amount of stuff getting contaminated, in other words. A lot of that now, because no one's paying attention, they changed the rules and they were actually dumping it in your landfills today. Or, even scarier, they're turning it into utensils, spoons and toys and forks and knives and frying pans and door handles and blah, 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 blah. That's 100% radioactive. They changed the law in increments over the last number of decades. The whole bloody industry is trying to exterminate all species without you figuring it out. And they got away with it. And we're the only ones on the planet that can show you directly how this actually works in a educational format that normally gets spammed, but I'm 100% censored. This is the easiest to deal with as the contamination is limited and can be buried in sites with less elaborate safety procedures. That's simply not true, though. All of that should be compacted and put into casks. But the cask can only last for 100 years. At some point, the cask is going to break down. And then that's going to end up in the water tables. There is no future as long as nuclear exists. There's no future as long as the nuclear pools are existing. They got to get shut down and they got to be contained. We got to do it. It has to get done. We're going to lose the planet as it is, but there's no hope for any species or humanity if we don't deal with the nuclear fuel pools immediately. Like, we're supposed to deal with that. They're not supposed to exist. Nuclear couldn't exist without perpetual laws. The world would have turned on nuclear a very long time ago, and nuclear would have been bashed to death with baseball bats a long time ago if the world knew what was really going on. In fact, if the world wakes up tomorrow, you won't be able to buy a baseball bat anywhere on this planet. And rightfully so. They're just disgusting. It's a despicable industry. So the bottom, like Sellafield fuel pools have been abandoned for like 40 years. They don't even know what's in the pool, where the fuel came from that's in the pool. But they got to keep water in those pools because they're still boiling off all day long. Absurd amount of radiation. And all of these places are surrounded by farms, as far as you can see. The biggest pile of radiation is going to land right in the farms, sucked up by the foods, and then shipped out to murder everybody worldwide. It causes up to 1,800 diseases. At what point are you going to fight back? At what point are you going to say, this is outrageous? What does it take for you to be outraged on this planet, I wonder? I'm not talking to the regular people. I'm talking to anybody new. What does it take for you to understand how incredibly slippery the slope we're on is? That we are being destroyed by a death cult known as the nuclear industry. And that story just keeps going and going and going, of bad news after bad news after bad news. Paneled off behind high fences patrolled by armed guards. Imagine you got that job, where your job is to walk around a fuel pool with weapons. You're going to get sick and die from it, so are your children. It's impossible not to. It's the worst job imaginable in the context of security. All outer clothing worn inside the zone, shoes, overalls, helmets, must stay on the contaminated far side of the divide and are checked with Geiger counters when we emerge. Well, the Geiger counter they're using only looks for gamma. It's not looking for alpha or neutrons or betas. It's a scumbag industry. It's a degenerate, coward industry full of cowards. And they're processing mixed oxide fuel there on top of that. In the 1980s, working on a new reactor projects, like many nuclear engineers, found that her career calmed after the Chernobyl accident, and she moved over to decommissioning in 1999. And no one quite knew what to do at the beginning, because the emphasis has always been on building nuclear, not cleaning up it. Right? So the United Kingdom Decommissioning Authority is not even trying. They're not trying. They don't want to. They want this to hemorrhage into the communities. It's actually on purpose. As we surveyed the ponds, our dosimeters occasionally chirping. Dosimeters around fuel rods that don't work. At the outset, especially decommissioning, is a lottery. There are good and bad surprises. Sometimes you only find out what you're dealing with when you stick a robot or a scoop into it. This place is surrounded by farms and communities on top of that. It doesn't seem like it's possible. Like, this story really truly doesn't seem that it could be true. It actually doesn't seem like, how can this be true? Persuading the public that a solution is safe is proven hard, says the hateful, maniacal savage known as Geraldine Thomas. She actually murders children all day when she's not out lying for the industry, for the death cult. She murders children all day with radiation. That's what she does for a living. When she's not out doing interviews and giving propaganda out, she actually murders children all day long. Geraldine Thomas is a professor with Imperial College London, and her side job is radiating children till they die. I'll play a clip of this creature that murders children.
Well, in terms of the actual risks, there aren't any that anybody needs to be worried about. If people are concerned about exposure to radiation, it's very simple to carry a personal dosimeter around with you. And there are plenty of things that you can look up on the internet that will give you an idea of where that dose fits into other things. So, for example, coming here, I would have got a dose of 0.07 millisieverts on the flight. And I actually went round Fukushima Daiichi on Wednesday, and the dose that I had going around the site, so very close to where the reactors are, it was 0.01 and probably lower, but that's the lowest it could actually read. So I got more of a dose flying here, and we'll get a dose tomorrow when I fly home, than I would have done from being in Fukushima.
So she's claiming at a nuclear meltdown, she had a bigger dose on the plane, Geraldine Thomas. Look, the nuclear meltdown, not one person could be seen at the plant because it's lethal doses everywhere. 2 sieverts, the stuff they were allegedly putting in the tank is 2 sieverts an hour of just beta. A gallon is a lethal dose. If you fill up the tank with this stuff, you can't build another tank and you can't get back on the site. The tanks are empty. That's the proof of it. Just the rainwater drain pipes are 3.6 sieverts. These are absurd numbers. But she got a bigger dose on an airplane. Fatal radiation levels exceed 10 sieverts per hour at Fukushima. But she walked all around Fukushima and she got a bigger dose on an airplane. Imagine what kind of friggin' monster you got to be. But she actually radiates children as a side hobby. She murders children with radiation. And she's out there telling you that it's harmless. She's out there lying right to you. And she's in charge of your children. You have absolutely no fucking morals on this planet allowing that to happen. Excuse the language, but how can the world sit in silence with creatures like that on our planet? 2 more spots appear to be above 10 sieverts. How come the police haven't shot that yet? I can't reconcile. 2 more spots to be above 10 sieverts per hour. These are way above lethal doses. But Geraldine Thomas is saying that she got a bigger dose walking around on an airplane than she did in a nuclear wasteland. High radiation doses, these are lethal doses, 10 sieverts an hour. TEPCO unsure how to access areas, radiation levels are 10 sieverts an hour. But their Geiger counters were maxing out at 10 sieverts an hour. 10 sieverts an hour, literally everywhere you go there. Dozens of sieverts. These are, by the way, this is lethal doses right away. But it gets worse. 266 sieverts at number 1 drywall. 512 sieverts was also recorded at the number 1 drywall. These are the lethal doses from a football field away. Defective? Of course it's defective. Nothing can survive 512 sieverts. It breaks right away. Monitors detected 100,000 sieverts, then it died. It was considered 1 million sieverts outside of number 1 containment after the original detonations. But Geraldine Thomas says she can walk all around that and she had a bigger dose flying on a plane. And then she goes home on her plane, she takes children, and then she murders them with radiation. All day, every day, her whole life, that's what she's been doing, murdering your loved ones. That's not a death cult. Nuclear fallout will engulf Taiwan. But she got a bigger dose on the airplane than at the nuclear meltdown. But yet, in Taiwan, everybody was told to stay home and get rid of their clothing. They done the same thing in South Korea. And they should have done all in the Northern Hemisphere, should have stayed home and then abandoned the Northern Hemisphere because of Fukushima radioactive fallout. And Geraldine Thomas insults everybody and murders children so she can get a paycheck each week. And she relishes in it. She revels in it, I should say. Radiation data from Seattle survey will be withheld by the feds for national security purposes. National security purposes. National security purposes was, it was 450,000 times you were supposed to abandon that city and that part of your country. There's your evidence. And it's not just going to be xenon, which, by the way, burns a hole through your lung. and then sequesters in your bones. New York Times contributor confirms California rainwater 181 times above drinking water standards. But Geraldine Thomas got a bigger dose flying on the airplane than she did from being at the nuclear meltdown. But 5,500 miles away, it's incredible doses. Hot radioactive particles in Seattle at 50% of the levels seen in Tokyo. And Tokyo was brutally radioactive. And by the way, 50 becquerels a kilogram in humans lead to irreversible lesions in the vital organs. Children with 11 becquerels of cesium start to see a heart problem. This is why shipping food from now going to ship food into Canada and the United States as of last week, from 14 prefectures that were closed for the last 10 years because they're so radioactive. They just randomly said, no, it's all good. Magically, all good overnight. It's a death cult. 11 becquerels a kilogram. The food they're allegedly shipping in is 100 becquerels a kilogram. So for adults, 50 becquerels, you see irreversible lesions in your vital organs. 11 becquerels a kilogram, just a single time, destroy you and children. Imagine eating it every day, what's going to happen. Irreversible heart damage for children with 50 becquerels a kilogram. So this is why COVID exists, is to cover up all the die-offs from eating this food. And so now they got the whole planet is going to need passports to get into supermarkets and everywhere else. Now they come in with the food, and now they just murder you and blame it on coronavirus, yeah? That's the cover story for Fukushima, is coronavirus. Just look back at what they talked about, right? Oh, they died after testing positive. They died after testing positive. They didn't die of coronavirus. They died and tested positive. There's a big difference. Eerie fog of silence around Fukushima plant. No sound in the no-go zone. But Geraldine Thomas, no, everything is good. I want to go back to UK and murder your children with gamma shines and x-rays and neutron bursts. Fukushima plume model showed 1 million becquerels a square meter over the west coast. Does the world really think that there's no adverse side effects from that? Do you really think that disappeared in 10 years? You really think that's going to disappear in 1,000 years? You are incredibly stupid. Iodine 131, by the way, is just something you can find easily. It's nasty too, by the way. But for every iodine 131 in that liter, per liter, 20 million particles per liter, there's 10 times more 132, 30 times more 133, 31 times more iodine 129 per liter in that same liter. And that the iodine 132 and 133 are 9 times more effective at ionizing and radiating your thyroid glands in animals and insects and birds and mammals' thyroid glands, because humans are not the only thing affected by this. Then iodine 131. And iodine 131 is unbelievably effective at ionizing and destroying your thyroid gland. Your thyroid gland takes it and turns it into a radioactive hormone and distributes it out through your body. That's why you see an obesity spike across the northern hemisphere, particularly coastlines, because it's always coming out of the ocean into the coastline. It looks like fog now, but it's now radioactive fog. 220 million atoms per liter. These are catastrophic numbers. So they can find the 129, they can find the 131 easily. But now you're supposed to do a mathematical equation because the reactors don't run on iodines. They run on uranium and plutonium, and the nuclear meltdown, the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rods is the curium isotopes with hundreds of thousands of years of half-lives. And you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium, which is, by the way, named after the devil. Move south of the equator if reactor 4 fuel pool goes dry. Ernie Gunnison. Well, there's reactor 4, it's gone. This is where the fuel pools would have been at the very top of the 190-foot high building, 150 feet wide. And both of those pools you see are stuffed with reactor cores because they have no repository anywhere on the planet, let alone in Japan. This makes Chernobyl look like a paper towel, and Chernobyl is no paper towel. Chernobyl was brutal. But Chernobyl is no comparison to these just single reactor. There's multiple nuclear reactors melted down in Japan. So Arnie Gunnarsson said move south of the equator, abandon the northern hemisphere. He said abandon the northern hemisphere because if that happens, and it did, then you expect to see that and that and that, and stuff like that, see? So what Arnie Gunnarsson was doing was hoodwinking you.
The division I ran built nuclear fuel racks for boiling water reactors exactly like Fukushima.
So he's built the racks for the fuel pools. I put him up there where the fuel pool is too. Right? He's up there where the fuel pools are too. Now, if he doesn't know the fuel pools are gone, he built the assemblies, or the racks for the assemblies where to put the fuel rods in each assembly. If he doesn't know, who the frig knows? He built the racks for 74 similar reactors, the boiling water reactors. The world's stupidest design is to put the fuel pools at the top of these buildings. Nuclear activists to be constantly spied upon. Back to the Financial Times and endless lies, right? So now they invoke Robert Gale. Here's Robert Gale. Robert Gale. It's hard to wrap your mind around this. I'm going to show you backwards. First, I'm going to show you what he's talking about when he's talking about radiation.
And then the final slide will just show you, where on that thermometer does something like Fukushima lie. Now, you'll hear a lot of detailed scientific discussions of our uncertainties, that we shouldn't really be talking about point estimates. We should be talking about ranges. But I think what people want to know, what the public want to know, what I have to deal with, and when I'm in Tokyo, and people ask me, or the workers ask me, what is my risk from getting 50 millisieverts? They want to know really where. I'm sorry, if you can go back. Where am I on that thermometer? They don't care if it's 2 in 10,000 or 4 in 10,000, which is a huge scientific difference. But
okay, just so you can appreciate it. He had childhood exposure to 131, which has an 8-day half-life. Not plutonium, which all children's teeth now apparently have in it because of the nuclear. Negligible doses. They got Fukushima. They're equating man-made stuff with natural stuff in this scale, which is inappropriate. It's not the same.
Just where am I on that calendar, on that thermometer? And I think these kinds of expressions, give a better sense to the public, and that's certainly an area where we can improve. And I guess the final slide, I'm sorry, it wasn't the final slide, is just looking at comparable risks of death is another way of trying to express these things to the public. So getting 1 millisievert.
So this is the chart. She went to Fukushima where the workers, the homeless and destitute, the victims of society, immigrants who don't speak the language, who are actually at the nuclear meltdown, not nuclear academics or nuclear scientists or anything like that. And this is what he's telling them the equivalent of working at Fukushima is eating 25 cups of peanut butter, spending 20 days in a car, driving 600 kilometers in a car, kayaking for 15 minutes is the equivalent of a nuclear meltdown. Right, so I mean, that's over the top stuff, isn't it? Just let them finish out. That's over the top lies. That's one of the worst lies I've ever come
Radiation,
across.
just on the bottom, is equivalent to just smoking just 14 cigarettes, period. Not 14 cigarettes a day, but smoking 14 cigarettes. And you can see some other amusing things like eating 25 cups
Amusing things.
of peanut butter. Peanut butter has a risk of containing amusing things like eating 25 cups of peanut butter. Peanut butter has a risk of containing aflatoxin, which is can cause your death or can cause liver cancer. Driving 600 kilometers. So that really helps people quite a bit in understanding where they should place the risk of Fukushima. So I'll stop there and
Okay.
return it to you.
So they're saying that Fukushima is equal to kayaking for 15 minutes at the nuclear meltdown, or peanut butter, or driving 600 kilometers. It really, like if you have a conversation with somebody and say that to them, no one's going to believe you. Nah, nobody would dare say that, Dana. But who is Robert Gale? Who is the person that told these unbelievable lies about radiation? Who in their right mind, what kind of degenerate scumbag would say that to people? Here's what kind of degenerates. This hopefully should shock you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Robert Gale. I'm a visiting professor of hematology at the Imperial College in London, and I'm an MD PhD, and I treat people with cancer, and so my background in entering this is really fundamentally in giving. I'm involved very much in transplants, bone marrow transplants, because you may know that we use extraordinarily high doses of radiation to prepare people for transplants, and that very much simulates the situation that could occur or did occur in Chernobyl and other radiation accidents. So my colleagues and I are the people who actually have hands-on experience treating high-dose radiation victims. And in lifetime cancer risk, for example, I said that for a Japanese or American male at the age of 50, it's about 1 in 2, 50% is your lifetime cancer risk, which is somewhat discouraging. I think several people have said to me in hearing that if I have to get cancer, I hope I get a good one. I hope I get prostate cancer and not lung cancer. But you can make that worse by being a smoker, as you can see from that thermometer. But there are some other things. What do we consider negligible? Where does a CT, probably fit in?
So he does transplants and treats people for cancer. And then he does the media circuits and tells everybody that it's like eating peanut butter or being in a car or kayaking. It just doesn't even seem possible, does it? Nah, that can't be real, Dana. No, I know, you've seen it with your own 2 eyes, but you're like, nah, that can't be real. You photoshopped that, Dana. I know, you got me. An actual murderers. That's murderer row right there. And so he treats people with radiation. Now, when you get a brain tumor or a tumor and they treat you, aka murder you, here's how this actually works. They might reduce that tumor or this tumor. Say they reduced this tumor, but now you got a tumor up here. Oh, it's worse. You get brain tumors from radiation injuries. Brain injuries from radiation injuries. Lots of studies on that. Breast cancer, radiotherapy, or late radiation injuries from breast cancer patients. So they treat you with radiation. Now later you get other radiation injuries showing up. Spinal cord injuries from radiation. Radiation-induced lung injuries. Radiation-induced death, which is what 97% of people will die quickly from the radiation. Late radiation rectal injuries. So you got a brain tumor or a lung tumor. Now you got rectal tumors. And you got nervous tumors, nervous system block tumors. You got cognitive impairment from patients with radiation therapy. Aging masks the detection of radiation-induced brain injuries. Oh, he's old, she's old. No. She was murdered by the nuclear industry, the nuclear death cult. Radiation injuries in the intestines. Radiation-induced cardiac injuries. Radiation injury to the nervous systems, to the eyes. And the list just keeps going, by the way. I'm not going to do it to you, but I have many times. So he says he treats patients, but you can't treat people with radiation. It should be banned worldwide. It's not a treatment. And we actually have studies For instance, I'll bring up one of the studies on chemotherapy for you that was repeated recently. There we go. So what's the percentage? This study here was repeated in 2004, originally 1985. It was only 3% efficiency of chemotherapy treatment on cancer as a cancer cure. But 3% is actually the typical misdiagnosis. So they didn't even have cancer in the first place. This is why they survived. It was repeated in 2004. They all asked the same question. 2.3% in Australia and 2.1% in America lived longer with chemo than without it. So the question was, why are we even using it when it has zero benefits? Because they hate you. They despise you. They want you gone, and that's how they're doing it. According to U.S. oncologist and radiation expert Robert Gale, who I just showed you, says there's no increase of leukemia known to be caused by radiation in Fukushima. Well, first off, radiation, cancer is not the only injury you get. But in 2012, there was 865,000 extra cancer cases. But radiation causes heart problems and liver problems, and fatal ones at that. So heart problems, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline causes Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, and Down syndrome, even schizophrenia. There's 1,800 illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries caused by radiation. It's not just cancer. But that's how the brainwashing from the death cult actually works, yeah? So he's promoting, he's a part of the death cult. They had a 6.1 magnitude earthquake struck Japan today. Again, no tsunami warning. The reason you have a tsunami, because they won't tell you this, is the tectonic plates drop. If that happens, then you're going to have a tsunami. And because that happens over it's not going to be just a rumble. This is actual tectonic plates will drop. That's described as an earthquake. But right with that, you displace a large volume of water for hundreds of miles, and that creates the tsunami. So the reason they put the words up there, that's part of their fear-mongering protocol. An earthquake with a magnitude of 6.1 struck in the central part of the Sea of Japan on Wednesday. It shook Tokyo, by the way. Its epicenter, now they've been doing this just for 2 years or so, where they give a latitude and longitude. I've never seen this before. Instead of saying it's 100 miles southwest of this city and at a depth of this, they give you a latitude and a longitude. This has just been going on for about 2 years. Quake logged a 3 on Japan's scale, which peaks at 7. So a 3 is on the international scale is actually equal to a 5 on the Richter scale. But Iwate, Fukushima Prefecture, and because the reactors, now this was a very deep quake on top of that. It was incredibly deep. So what you're worried about, I'll give you an idea of why quakes around Fukushima are bad. Because if you shake these melted reactors, more plumes escape. That's why. And so what they done was, first off, I'll show you reactor 3 and 4 because this is amazing. So reactor 4 is over there, reactor 3 is right here. So reactor 4, media worldwide pretended that it wasn't melted down. They're pretending they're 100 feet above what's left of the wreckage over there. And they're pretending they're at the top of that. They're in America at a similar nuclear power plant like Arnie Gunnison had described earlier. the human trash, the traitor that Ernie is, claiming they're on top of a building that actually doesn't even exist.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011, leading to the country's worst nuclear disaster.
Right, and they've done the same thing with Reactor 3, where they pretended that that building now is normal. So they faked it, right? But the earthquake is real. Now that earthquake was also felt in Tokyo, but it was at a depth of 228 miles, 368 kilometers deep. That's a real earthquake when you're feeling a level 5 in Fukushima. That is incredible, actually incredible. 3 Japan Prime Minister hopefuls call for maintaining mixed oxide fuel recycle program for max fuel. Do you think that's an accident? And they have to pander to the nuclear industry so they can get elected. See that? It shows you how much control the nuclear industry has when future Japanese prime ministers, the first thing they got to do is swear their allegiance to the death cult. That is like unbelievable that 3 monsters are running for the Japan prime ministership. Well, you're not really a prime minister of the country. You're a lapdog for the death cult nuclear industry. That's all you're really doing, yeah? There is no prime ministership. There's just murder in corporate. Said fuel recycle is necessary to ensure a stable power supply. But I showed you earlier, renewables, the animosity equivalent of 300 nuclear power plants came online last year in renewables. And there's a concerted effort to downplay that, see? Process involves recovering plutonium and uranium from spent nuclear fuel for recycling. Now that's illegal in most countries worldwide because you're going to pollute your country by burning it. It's illegal in the United States, it's illegal in Canada. Most nuclear countries except for France and the nuclear in Sellafield and Dana in the United Kingdom and Belgium are about the only places that are recycling it. But it is bizarre that the only way they can become the prime minister of the country is to immediately come out and swear their allegiance to the nuclear death cult known as nuclear. High Court holds the government liable for damages over nuclear action for the 3rd time. Again, this is pathetic. 46 million yen for 23 evacuees. 43 million yen is $500,000 Canadian. Canadians worth nothing, by the way. Is $22,000 each. Time he pays the lawyer and taxes, there's nothing left over. And you lose your home and your communities and all your friends. And you can't go back and visit the graveyards. You're going to walk away with a couple of $1,000s. That's how powerful the nuclear industry is. You're lucky they got that. It's just doesn't seem possible, but yet it's 100%. Who makes the decision on choosing nuclear disposal sites in Canada? And what are the criteria? The federal government has the authority, which has been captured by the nuclear industry, the death cult, in increments now over decades. Not the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. The Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission are the industry itself that created the waste in the first place. That's who's on the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. And certainly not the private company that owns the Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. Private company, which is actually an American company, owns Canada's nuclear laboratory, Chalk River, where they had one of the first meltdowns on the planet that's still ongoing, and they have entombed the reactor that melted down there. By the way, it's surrounded by farms. All nuclear power plants are built in farmland. It seems, however, that the criteria changes depending on where a site might be located. And remember, I covered Gene Critchin. I can't direct you to the video because he took down my site last month. And I had a perfect presentation on this story. Has supported a proposal to... Now, former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien used to work for a French company, the French Connection. Hang on, let me see if I can find it for you very quick. Because that's extraordinarily important, yeah? Give me a second, see if I got it where it should be. Just so you can find it and read it later, right? Oh, Canada. Yeah, I don't see it. And I can't reach the computer to type into the bookmark for it. But if you look up French Connection, anyway, let's keep going here. If you look up French Connection, you'll find it. So how's our poll doing? Let's jump back to that for 1 second. Should nuclear lobbyists and apologists spend life in jail for crimes against humanity? 70% says yes. 2 people said no for some reason. And 13% says they should get the death penalty, which is my favorite one. But life in jail is good too because they suffer, right? So that's good. I like that. Coming along good. And how many votes do we get on that again? It's 30 votes. We had 67 votes last night in favor. And I couldn't do it right now. We were spammed, basically. The federal government, in the person of the Minister of Natural Resources, supported since there was no process to determine if local citizens were an informed and willing host. There was no referral to the Canadian nuclear... Oh, that's the Gene Chrétien story. To conduct environmental assessment. So what basically how that story went was Gene Chrétien conspired with Japan to bring Japan's nuclear waste to Canada, to Newfoundland, Labrador, to Labrador in particular, Canada, and bury it there without telling the Canadians. Whatever you do, don't tell the Canadians. The federal government, through an act of Parliament, created a nuclear waste management organization to find a nuclear dump site. And the only spots they're looking at are in Bruce County, where it's all farmland. Because that's the criteria, because everything is vented before it's actually put into the repository. And they're never going to do that, right? They're just going to bring it there and vent it, leave it venting. If you don't vent it, the gases build up, and then oxygen or water introduced into it will cause it to detonate, and you lose control of the entire site immediately. So eventually that's what's going to happen sooner rather than later, unfortunately. Among the criteria is that the site be in a place where citizens give an informed and willing consent. Not out in the middle of nowhere, but in a community. Where citizens give an informed and willing consent, and they're inundated with propaganda, and then this nuclear organization, the so-called Nuclear Waste Management Organization, is the actual industry that created the waste. They're in charge of getting rid of the nuclear toxic waste. Imagine that. Imagine how pathetic. So it shows you Canada is destroyed. The nuclear death cult is now already destroyed our country. They've taken over all the key positions and seeded the key positions with the nuclear industry itself. The places they're looking at, as we covered many times, is all farmland. And they want the farmers to keep farming for the next 100 years while they're doing it. In a place where citizens give an informed consent. Well, if they're informed, and they get informed by watching someone like me, literally me, unfortunately, pathetically and sadly, they won't be given consent. They'll be using baseball bats. Why are the criteria different in these examples? The federal government needs to exercise its authority and act now to move the NSDF well away from the river. This is not a decision to be left to the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. Well, there is no Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. It's it's a nuclear death cult itself, see? They create these controlled opposition groups, is how that actually works. And then they're the so-called authority. Nuclear power, downward trend ahead of the climate summit. They got the climate summit. And of course, climate change is caused by 75 years of radiation. And so these plumes from just Fukushima only, there's all kinds of these plumes existing now for years and decades. That's an energy plume, pure energy, pulsing energy almost at the speed of light. Imagine a snowstorm pulsing energy at the speed of light. Then you can kind of understand what I'm talking about, because it's invisible, but it's not invisible to the Geiger counters. That's global warming, heating up the planet. Pulsing energy, an invisible snowstorm now circling that envelops the entire planet. A continuous plume. It's not like a plume that's moving along. It's a continuous plume. All the way from the ocean floor to the surface and all the way up to the troposphere, stratosphere. Pulsing energy every second. That's nuclear. That's what they got done to the planet, and it's going to be like that for the next millions of years. And so the idea is to trick you now and say the only solution to their mess is more nuclear power plants, because all of them is more hemorrhaging into the environment, more splitting the atom into the environment, which only can mean one thing, is they're insane. The industry is actually... I've never come across somebody in the nuclear industry that's honest, and I've never come across anybody that's lucid. They're always bizarre freaks. You know, if they're walking out to their car and another car on the parking lot backfires, they'll defecate all over themselves. They'll reach down, they'll smear it all over themselves because they figure you'll be too disgusted now to beat them up. 2 years since the Fukushima disaster, 10 years since the disaster, expensive nuclear energy plants are being shut down across the world as the renewable prices plummet. In the face of soaring gas prices in the United Kingdom, some scum degenerates are pushing nuclear energy as the savior. I showed you some of them already. The argument goes that the energy source is low carbon emissions. This is absurd to suggest, by the way. Each nuclear power plant needs 2 external power plants to run them, right? And that the new smaller reactors can more quickly be brought online, which they don't even exist. It'll take you 10 years to get a design built. It'll take you at least 10 to 20 years to work the kinks out of it. Then it's going to take you another 10 years to build a new design and make sure that's safe. The whole industry is doing everything it can to exterminate all the species. And we can't actually change that, but we can hold them accountable. As the 2021's World Nuclear Industry Status Report was released on Wednesday, confirmed uranium-fueled energy constitutes an ever-decreasing proportion of the energy mix. Exorbitant costs, especially compared to renewables, is exacerbating the fallout from Fukushima that drove countries like Germany and Belgium to phase out the fuel by 2022 and 2025 respectively. Nuclear energy shares of the global gross electricity generation continues a slow but steady decline. And the comparatively cheap cost of renewables is at the heart of the problem. And they confirmed that new renewable electricity investments was above $300 billion in 2020, which is 17 times higher Then they reported global investment in the nuclear disease factories known as nuclear power. And it's climate change, which is caused by nuclear and continued to be exacerbated by nuclear, moves up the political agenda. Nuclear power is not considered in many countries as part of the transformation of the energy sector in order to decarbonize. No, you can't decarbonize. That's not the solution, decarbonizing. The solution is you got to shut down all nuclear. You got to get rid of the emissions from all the nuclear fuel pools, and you got to deal with Hanford. You got to deal with Fukushima. You actually got to deal with Mayak in Ukraine. You got to deal with Santa Susana, which is 460 times worse than 3 Mile Island. They melted down in 1959, a sodium reactor. Each of the sodium reactors they built on the planet so far, all of them melted down. You got to deal with them. And the nuclear industry is not going to do it. They got no intentions. Oh yeah, no, we'll take the money and do it. And it'll never get even attempted, let alone accomplished. Under any circumstances, the nuclear industry has an agenda to never accomplish any waste criteria whatsoever. Never deal with a period. Always just a fable. So a tipping point has been reached in some countries whereby they'll take up renewables such that it's so much cheaper to build new renewables than it is to build nuclear. First off, it uses all the precious resources on the planet on top of that and gobbles it up and irradiates it. In the United States, the Biden administration pledged to build no more nuclear reactors, due in part to the failed projects in South Carolina and Georgia. And the investor Westinghouse Electric lost billions before filing for bankruptcy in 2017. So did Paladin, right? Hang on. So did Paladin. There was a number of them filed bankruptcy. I probably can't find that right now. Just give me a second. Nuclear is such an incredible betrayal. Yeah, I can't find it. It's okay. Let's keep going. Oh. Because Areva went bankrupt. Woods pulled out of it. I got it. Okay, here we go. That's the one. There we go. So let me start it at the top here. You had Areva, which was France government, went bankrupt. So they didn't have to fulfill their obligations for all the contracts of nuclear fuel that they had, nuclear dumps. So they just went bankrupt. And they created a new company the next day called Areva, or called Orano, that only done fuel. Yeah, that's what they done. Westinghouse bankruptcy will kill the U.S. nuclear expansion plans in India. Paladin Energy crashes and files for insolvency in Australia. The energy service giant Wood sold its shares of nuclear energy in the United Kingdom. And the nuclear and coal lobby threatened to scupper renewables in South Africa. Think about that statement. You can really appreciate what kind of degenerate nuclear industry actually is. Talk of a nuclear industry renaissance built on making the fuel of an essential part of decarbonization, low carbon energy mix no longer makes economic sense. And the industry is on the edge of a cliff, literally and figuratively. Taiwan had a 5.7 earthquake, and they got nuclear power plants. Taiwan, they have a major nuclear college, university, 2,000 plus students. After Fukushima, when Fukushima happened, they had 2,000 students in Taiwan, spam the internet for the next couple of years. Every Twitter, every Facebook, every YouTube video, every article written, if there was a comment section, the 2,000 students, some of them would have showed up and spam propaganda. Oh, it's like walking in sunshine, or it's like a banana, or it's eating a potato chip. It was a concerted effort by the students. And Taiwan had multiple nuclear power plants in an earthquake zone. And Taiwan, by the way, uses the same scale as Japan. I didn't know that. That's how they hide the damage, is the Japanese scale. Oh, we had a 6 earthquake. That don't sound so bad, Dana. Yeah, but I'll show you what a 6 earthquake actually is on the Richter scale. So take 10, which is the international scale, divide it by 7, which is Taiwan Japanese scale. So each one of the Japanese Taiwan scales equal to 1.428. Multiply that by a 6, which doesn't sound very bad, but when you scale it up, it's an 8.6. It's actually an 8.6 earthquake, right? Do you get it? So they used the 1 to 7 scale to trick and deceive the population and everybody else. So they have intensity level of 3, which is a 4.2. And you can see where they got the nuclear power plants. But you can also see that the whole country was shaken, the entire country shaken from that earthquake. The entire country. On their scale, see, a 1 and a 2 is still not high on the international scale when you scale it up, but when you get up to 3s and 4s, it actually is. And Taiwan is not that big of a country. 35,000 square miles is comparative to Vancouver Island, British Columbia, Canada. 400 by 100 mile, basically. Taiwan now is allowed to inspect the Japanese nuclear wastewater releases. Once again, at 2.2 sieverts, you can go back through my videos last week or 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, and I've done presentations on the tanks with the documentation. You can't, these tanks, if you fill up one tank, you can't build another tank on the site. You can't get on the site again. You're talking about 1.4 million sieverts, and the tank would have to be, 3 to 4 feet thick. Actually, got to be about 6 feet thick to shield anybody within a football field of 1.4 million sieverts. If you put that water, by the way, through a filter, the filter is so radioactive, after a few hours, if you just put clean water through it, when it comes out the other side, it's lethal doses. And that'll be forever. So Taiwan, which spammed the internet for several years straight with the nuclear lobbying group they got there and the students, are somehow going to be the arbiters of facts, is one of the most ludicrous things I've ever heard. Taiwan must deal with Japan's food import ban because they, good people ended up a couple of years ago having a referendum whether Taiwan should import food from a nuclear wasteland in Japan. And the population voted no emphatically. But what the nuclear universities done were they gave the class days off to go out and propaganda in the communities and train stations and bus stations and sidewalks to try to get a yes vote, to poison themselves and their friends and their loved ones in their country. Because this is what we're talking. This is not a game. This is not an opinion. This is facts, what I'm talking about. The whole industry, entire legacy is predicated upon deception and misrepresentation and deceit and dishonesty. If anybody knew the truth about nuclear, they'd be exactly like I am, fighting for the future for all species and all of humanity. Children around the world are suffering from climate anxiety from the nuclear industry. You gotta have nuclear, you're gonna lose the planet. It's the only thing we can use. Everywhere you go. Everywhere you go. Everywhere I go. You see that. The nuclear industry saying, you gotta have nuclear. Nothing else will do it. And they're murdering your children in the hospitals, murdering your friends and your families and your loved ones at the hospitals with the same radiation. This death cult. That's what it is. It's a death cult, yeah? Human death cult. And they got children terrified. They can't even sleep at night worldwide because of the nuclear death cult. That's the reality that you're living in right now. And you're in this one moment in history where you have the great equalizer, like I'm doing right now, where you can educate the population with documentation. I provide the basis, the foundation of pure facts. The documentation I bring to the table, you can take it into a courtroom and win a case with it. Every case. Information I bring to the table is unassailable. It's the documentation. It's the facts. You know, we're going to close the poll down here in a minute. If we don't close the poll, then it won't show up. It won't show up in the replay, right? So I'll give you another minute or something if you want to vote. 70% of the people of 33 votes says that pro-nuclear lobbyists, people who promote nuclear, spend life in jail for crimes against humanity. Somehow or another, a couple of them showed up and said, no, we don't want to go to jail. And a couple of people voted that they should get the death penalty, which is 100% what should happen. I put that there. Should they get the death penalty, right? And I actually expected the majority of people to vote they should get the death penalty. But hey, I'm still happy that they should spend the rest of their lives in jail. So 35 votes. I'm going to close the polls in a few minutes, or less than a few minutes. And I'll close the poll, so I'll bring that back up in a minute. Let me say goodnight to everybody before I close the poll. We also raised $60 last night. James Lucid, as you know him in the comment section. Incredibly amount of support from James over the last year in particular. Before that certainly, but in the last year we've been extremely struggling, and in the last month and a half desperately struggling, and so I can't possibly articulate how much I appreciate the help. It really does matter. It really does make a difference. Let me say goodnight to everybody quickly. I got to keep the shows below 2 hours so I can post it at other sites. Chad, thank you, Chad. Shane, good night, Shane. AA. Yeah, that's right. No to desalination plants because of nuclear, indeed. Sandra Churchill, hi, Sandra. James Lucid, hugs, my friend. Thank you so much. Yeah, the Pacific doesn't glow at night because we killed the phytoplankton. James Olhan, hi, James. Hope you're doing well. Boston. Yeah, I refuse to eat anything in the Pacific also. Christian. Good night, everybody. God bless everybody. Charles Sand. Steve White. Scott Brady. Just scrolling up through the comments. Colette S. Hi, Colette. Hope you're doing well. Shayla White. Hi, Shayla. Hugs for everybody. Shayla says, by death penalty, Dana, you mean throw him in the nuclear reactor, correct? Yeah, it's true. Throw him out of a plane onto the nuclear bonfires. Ella, hi Ella. If I miss anybody, it's not on purpose. Because I squint when I laugh and I got a tendency to miss things. Not that I laugh very often anymore. Ooh, that was a great show tonight, I thought. Loaded with documentation. Dana Nasana. Hi, Dana. I hope you're doing well, man. I know you guys are tortured down there with all the forest fires. So I'm almost to the top. I'll come down to the recent comments in a second. I'm going to end the poll here in a moment. I'll do that live. William. Hi, William. Everybody's watching this later and right now in the background and tomorrow. Hugs for everybody. I hope you have a great night and a great day tomorrow. Daryl Murray. Tim Norris. Yeah, we had lots of people here tonight. Wow. Almost through it. I only served one king. Hi there. Hugs, everyone. Okay, let's come down and close the poll, and we'll finish saying goodnight. Here we go. We're going to close the poll. Now, that should show up in the replay from here on out. So 36 votes. 17% says the death penalty. 69% says they should go to jail for life. The pro-nuclear community. I like it. And I like it a lot. And we say that'll show up in a minute. There you go. That showed up now. Right? There's the poll. So that should show up at the beginning of the replay. But it might not show up for an hour or so. Colette says her phone won't let her vote. This sucks. Thanks for trying. Steve Edwards. Yeah, good night, everybody. Did I get everybody? I did so. Yeah, there we go. Let's call her a night. I had a tough day. It never stops. I'm still putting everything together, still unpacking. But most importantly is doing these presentations, these shows. And we got to keep the pressure. And the way you keep the pressure on the nuclear industry is you tell the truth. Because the nuclear industry can't live with the truth. They can't live in sunshine. When you shine a light on the nuclear industry will wither and die. And that's what we do here. We're honest people, and we are here to go to war for those who don't know any better. Good night, everybody. God bless. Have a great night. See everybody tomorrow night. Tomorrow night's the last show. I'm going to get 2 days off. Not that I actually take time off, but I'll give you 2 days off. Unless we have breaking news. And I got a lot of work to accomplish. I still got to get a lot of stuff unpacked so I can have a day off where I don't have to work all day. Hopefully next week or the week after I'll get to that stage. Good night, everyone. Have a great night and great day tomorrow.